What if the very people who tried to destroy your name unknowingly left behind the evidence that would expose them? They called you corrupt, questioned your character, damaged your reputation, and convinced others to believe a story that was never the whole truth. They thought their accusations would become your permanent identity, but they forgot one thing. Lies can travel fast, but truth leaves records. Every message, every document, every decision, every hidden conversation has a way of resurfacing when the right moment comes. And now the story is changing. The same people who pointed fingers at you may suddenly find themselves answering difficult questions about their own actions. You don't need revenge. You don't need to fight every rumor or explain yourself to everyone. Sometimes God allows the truth to remain hidden for a season, so that when it is revealed, there can be no confusion about what really happened. The reputation they tried to destroy can be rebuilt stronger than before, not because you manipulated anyone, but because the truth finally had room to speak. So if you've been wondering why everything seemed silent, why nobody understood your side, or why people judged you without knowing the facts, stay with this message. Because what looked like the end of your reputation may have only been the beginning of your vindication. They thought they were exposing you, but they may have accidentally exposed themselves. The truth they buried is finally coming to light. There are seasons in life when you can do everything right and still find yourself standing in front of people who have already decided that you are guilty. They hear an accusation, accept a rumor, repeat a story, and suddenly your character becomes something they believe they understand. You may have tried to explain yourself, you may have answered questions, or you may have chosen silence because you knew that arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you would only drain your strength. But there is something powerful about truth. Truth does not need panic to survive. It can sit quietly while falsehood runs around making noise. They called you corrupt. They questioned your integrity. They damaged your reputation, and perhaps convinced people you trusted to look at you differently. They expected you to become desperate, emotional, and reactive. They wanted you to spend every waking moment trying to prove that you were innocent. But you discovered something deeper. You don't have to chase every accusation. You don't have to answer every whisper. You don't have to fight every person who believes a distorted version of your story. Sometimes the strongest response is to remain grounded while reality catches up with the people who created the deception. And now, something is shifting. The information they believed was safely hidden is beginning to speak. The documents they never thought anyone would examine carefully are being revisited. The messages they considered insignificant are suddenly important. The timelines they assumed nobody would question are beginning to reveal inconsistencies. What once looked like an ordinary collection of files may now contain the very details that explain what truly happened. This is where the situation changes completely, because accusations can be manipulated, but evidence has a different kind of power. Evidence can be examined, evidence can be compared, evidence can be verified. And when the facts begin contradicting the story they created, people naturally start asking different questions. They may ask why certain information was left out. They may ask why certain statements changed. They may ask why someone who appeared so confident is suddenly struggling to explain simple details. And that is when the spotlight begins moving away from you. You were never required to manufacture their downfall. Their own choices may have created the path toward their exposure. Think about how powerful that reversal is. They wanted everyone looking at you, but eventually people started looking behind the accusation. They wanted your name to become associated with corruption, but now people are examining the people who made those claims. They wanted you to defend yourself endlessly, but the evidence may be doing what your arguments never could, telling the story without emotion. And perhaps this is why you must not allow bitterness to consume you. When someone attacks your reputation, the natural temptation is to become obsessed with proving them wrong. You replay conversations, you imagine what you should have said. You wonder who believed them and who secretly judged you. You begin measuring every person's reaction, trying to determine whether they finally understand. But freedom comes when you realize that your identity cannot depend on the opinions of people who never took the time to know the truth. Your character was not created by their accusations, and it will not be destroyed by them. Let the facts stand where they stand. Let the truth unfold at its own pace. Let people discover what they should have investigated from the beginning. There is dignity in refusing to become the same kind of person who tried to hurt you. You don't need to manipulate anyone's opinion. You don't need to celebrate when their story collapses. You simply need to remain faithful to what is true. Because eventually, the questions become louder than the rumors. The contradictions become harder to ignore. The evidence becomes impossible to dismiss. And suddenly, the people who once looked at you with suspicion may begin looking at you with understanding. Some may even realize they judged you too quickly. Some may regret repeating things they never verified. Others may quietly apologize. But whether they apologize or not, your responsibility remains the same. Keep your heart steady, keep your integrity intact, and refuse to let their behavior transform you into someone you are not. Remember this: a reputation attacked by lies can be restored by truth, but a character built on truth was never truly destroyed in the first place. What they tried to use as your evidence of guilt may eventually become the doorway through which the truth walks into the light. And when that moment arrives, you won't need to scream, "I told you so." You will simply stand there knowing that you survived the storm without becoming the storm. The truth did not need your revenge. It only needed time. The case they built against you is falling apart. There is a moment when a false story becomes so complicated that the people who created it can no longer keep all the pieces together. At first, they were confident. They spoke as though they knew everything. They presented their accusations with certainty, convinced that nobody would ever question what they were saying. They wanted you to feel cornered. They wanted you to believe that your reputation had been permanently damaged and that no explanation could ever change people's minds. But they made one enormous mistake. They confused repetition with truth. Saying something again and again does not make it factual. A rumor does not become evidence simply because many people heard it. An accusation does not become a conviction because someone delivered it confidently. And now, the story they constructed is beginning to experience something they never prepared for: scrutiny. People are looking closer. Details are being compared. Statements are being placed beside records. Dates are being examined. Decisions are being questioned. Suddenly, what once appeared simple is becoming complicated, and what once appeared convincing is beginning to reveal cracks. This is the part they never expected. They thought the pressure would remain on you forever, but pressure has a way of moving when facts enter the room. The moment people start asking, "Where is the evidence?" everything changes. Because when someone builds a case against another person using assumptions, exaggerations, selective information, or manipulated narratives, they are depending on nobody checking the foundation. But once someone examines the foundation, every weakness becomes visible. One contradiction can create doubt. One missing detail can raise a question. One document can change the entire understanding of an event. And one overlooked record can force people to reconsider everything they previously believed. This is why you should never underestimate the power of patience. While they were busy creating a narrative, you were living with reality. While they were collecting opinions, you were carrying the truth. While they were trying to convince everyone that your character was questionable, you were continuing forward without needing to manufacture a performance of innocence. You may have felt frustrated because you wanted people to understand immediately. You may have looked around and wondered why nobody could see what seemed obvious to you. But truth does not always arrive on the schedule we want. Sometimes it emerges slowly, piece by piece, until the entire picture becomes impossible to ignore. And when that happens, the people who judged you may experience an uncomfortable realization. They were not given the truth. They were given a version of the truth designed to produce a particular reaction. That realization can be painful for them because it forces them to confront their own behavior. They have to remember the things they said. They have to remember the assumptions they made. They have to remember how quickly they believed accusations without asking whether those accusations were supported. Some may quietly distance themselves from the people who originally spread the story. Others may suddenly become much more careful with their words. And some may come to you with an apology that they should have offered much earlier. But here's where your strength must remain different from theirs. Don't become obsessed with watching them fall. Don't allow vindication to become another form of bondage. Your victory is not dependent upon seeing someone embarrassed. Your victory is knowing that you remain truthful when dishonesty would have been easier. Your victory is knowing that pressure did not make you abandon your principles. Your victory is realizing that the opinion of a crowd cannot redefine the person you know yourself to be. If the truth is now exposing inconsistencies in their story, allow that truth to do its work. You don't have to interfere with it. You don't have to exaggerate anything. You don't have to create another narrative to replace theirs. Let the facts speak. Let the records be examined. Let the contradictions reveal themselves naturally. Because when something is true, it becomes stronger under examination. Falsehood does the opposite. It requires constant protection. It requires new explanations. It requires people to forget yesterday's version so they can accept today's version. Eventually, that becomes exhausting. Eventually, someone notices. Eventually, the question becomes unavoidable. If their story was true, why doesn't the evidence support it? That question can change everything. The same people who once looked at you with suspicion may begin looking at the situation differently. The same voices that judged you may become silent, and the same reputation they tried to destroy may begin rebuilding itself, not through revenge, not through manipulation, but through undeniable clarity. So keep your heart calm. Don't let their accusations become your identity. Don't let their behavior pull you into behavior that compromises who you are. Stand firmly in what is true, because sometimes the strongest vindication is not a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it is simply watching a false story collapse under the weight of its own contradictions while you remain standing, peaceful, and completely unwilling to become what they falsely accused you of being. The evidence they trusted to protect them is now revealing the truth. There is a powerful moment in every situation where deception has been carefully constructed. Eventually, the people who built the story become dependent on the very evidence they thought would protect them. They believe the documents, messages, records, conversations, and decisions surrounding the situation would remain buried beneath their version of events. They assumed nobody would look closely enough to notice the details that didn't fit. They thought they could point toward you, create suspicion around your name, and then quietly walk away from the consequences of their own actions. But truth has an extraordinary way of hiding inside ordinary details. A sentence that seemed meaningless yesterday can become important tomorrow. A date that appeared insignificant can suddenly expose a contradiction. A message that someone believed would never matter can reveal an entirely different timeline. And when those pieces begin coming together, the story changes. This is why you should never underestimate documentation. People can change their stories, memories can become selective, and accusations can become exaggerated, but records have a way of preserving moments exactly as they happened. The people who accused you may have believed that controlling the conversation meant controlling the truth. They may have convinced others that they had everything figured out. They may have spoken with such confidence that questioning them felt almost impossible. But confidence is not evidence. Volume is not evidence. Popularity is not evidence. And repetition is not evidence. What matters is what can actually be supported by facts. Now imagine the moment someone finally opens the files and begins comparing what was claimed with what actually happened. Suddenly, the details don't look the same anymore. Something is missing. Something doesn't match. Something that was described as one thing appears to have been something completely different. The questions begin naturally, and those questions become uncomfortable because every answer creates another question. Why was this information omitted? Why did the timeline change? Why does this record contradict the original accusation? Why was this conversation never mentioned? Why were certain decisions made when the public story suggested something else? These questions can be more powerful than any angry confrontation because they force people to deal with reality instead of emotion. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson for you. You don't have to destroy anyone to be vindicated. You don't need to manufacture evidence against people who mistreated you. You don't need to become consumed with proving them wrong. If the truth is real, your responsibility is simply to remain faithful to it. Let the evidence speak. Let the inconsistencies reveal themselves. Let the people who have the authority to examine the situation do their work. Your peace becomes powerful when you stop trying to control the outcome. There may have been days when you wondered whether the damage to your reputation would ever be repaired. You may have watched people distance themselves from you because they believed something they heard. You may have felt helpless because the loudest voices seem to have the advantage. But sometimes the loudest voice is not the strongest voice. Sometimes silence is not defeat. Sometimes silence is the space in which reality is gathering enough evidence to become undeniable. And when that evidence emerges, you won't need to chase anyone down and convince them. They will see it themselves. They will recognize that the person they judged was not the person they were told you were. They may realize that they participated in a narrative without understanding the full picture. Some may feel embarrassed. Some may feel guilty. Some may attempt to rewrite their own involvement. But you don't have to participate in that confusion. Your task is to protect your character, not their comfort. Remember, when someone falsely attacks your reputation, they may temporarily control what people hear, but they cannot permanently control what people discover. Discovery is different from accusation. Discovery requires examination. It requires patience. It requires people to look beyond appearances and ask difficult questions. And once people start looking, hidden details have a way of becoming visible. That is why you must not lose hope, simply because the truth has taken longer than you expected. Delay does not mean denial. Silence does not mean abandonment. A closed door does not mean the story is finished. Sometimes the most important chapter is happening behind the scenes while everyone believes nothing is changing. Then suddenly one piece of information appears and everything begins moving. The people who were certain become uncertain. The people who judged you begin reconsidering. The people who repeated the accusations begin asking where those accusations came from. And the very files that were supposed to support their story become the reason their story is questioned. What a reversal. They thought they were building a shield, but they were unknowingly creating a record. They thought they were protecting themselves, but they were preserving details that could eventually reveal the truth. So don't allow anger to consume you. Don't let bitterness make you careless. Don't let the desire for revenge make you abandon the character you fought so hard to preserve. Keep walking with integrity. Keep your words measured. Keep your conscience clear. Because when truth finally stands in the light, you won't need to compete with the people who tried to bury it. You will simply watch the facts, tell the story they were determined to hide. And when that happens, your silence will no longer look like weakness. It will look like strength, patience, wisdom, and the confidence of someone who knew that the truth could survive without being forced. Your reputation is being restored without you begging anyone. There comes a point in your journey when you realize that defending yourself against every accusation is not the same thing as protecting your reputation. Sometimes, the more you explain, the more attention you give to a story that never deserved the power it was given in the first place. They called you corrupt. They questioned your character. They spoke about you as though they knew every detail of your life, every decision you made, and every intention behind your actions. They took pieces of information, shaped them into a narrative, and expected everyone to accept their version without asking deeper questions. For a while, it may have looked as though they had won. People who once respected you may have become distant. Conversations may have changed when you entered the room. Some people may have looked at you differently without ever asking what really happened. And that kind of experience can hurt deeply because you know how quickly a person's reputation can be damaged by words. But here's what they failed to understand. A reputation built on character cannot be permanently destroyed by accusations built on deception. Your character existed before their story, and it will remain after their story collapses. You don't need to chase every person who misunderstood you. You don't need to stand before every crowd and demand that they believe you. You don't need to spend your life correcting people who were never interested in knowing the truth. There is a powerful freedom that comes when you stop trying to control everyone's opinion. Let people think what they want for a season. Let them believe what they heard if they refuse to investigate. Let them walk away if they cannot see your heart. Your responsibility is not to control perception. Your responsibility is to remain faithful to who you are. Because eventually, life creates moments that words cannot control. Actions become visible. Patterns become undeniable. Records are examined. Decisions are remembered. People begin connecting details that once seemed unrelated. And suddenly, the person who was accused is no longer the center of attention. The circumstances surrounding the accusations become the center of attention. That is where restoration begins. It doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes restoration begins quietly. Someone who doubted you starts questioning what they heard. Someone who judged you begins looking at your actions differently. Someone who repeated the accusation realizes they never verified it. Another person may quietly admit, "I think we were wrong about you." And even if nobody says those words, you can still know that the truth is working. Your restoration does not require everyone to gather around you and celebrate. It only requires the false story to lose its power. Think about the strength it takes to remain calm when you know you have been misunderstood. It takes discipline not to respond with the same cruelty that was shown to you. It takes maturity to refuse to become vindictive. It takes faith to believe that what is hidden will eventually be revealed. And it takes courage to continue building your life while other people are busy discussing your name. They may have expected you to collapse under the pressure. Instead, you kept moving. They expected you to become bitter. Instead, you became wiser. They expected you to spend your future fighting their narrative. Instead, you decided to protect your peace. That is a victory they cannot take away from you. Because the moment you stop allowing their opinions to control your emotions, they lose the power they were trying to gain. You begin understanding that vindication is not always about watching someone else suffer. Sometimes vindication is simply waking up one morning and realizing that the lie no longer controls your life. You can breathe again. You can move forward again. You can build again. You can smile without explaining yourself. You can walk into a room without wondering who believes what. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that the people who truly matter will eventually judge you by your consistency, not by someone else's accusations. They will watch how you treat people. They will see how you respond under pressure. They will observe whether your actions match your words. Over time, authenticity becomes difficult to fake and impossible to ignore. The truth doesn't need constant promotion because your life becomes its evidence. So if you've been waiting for everyone to understand you, release that burden. If you've been waiting for every person to apologize, release that expectation. If you've been waiting for the people who hurt you to admit what they did, release your dependence on their confession. You don't need their permission to heal. You don't need their approval to move forward. You don't need their apology to know your worth. Let the truth handle what you cannot control. Let time reveal what pressure concealed. Let your actions speak louder than their accusations. And if their own records, decisions, and actions eventually expose what they tried to hide, don't become consumed by celebration. Simply recognize the lesson. You survived an attack on your reputation without surrendering your character. You walked through a season where people questioned your name, yet you refused to abandon your values. And now the same truth that seemed silent is beginning to restore what was damaged. They tried to define you by a story they created, but your life is writing a stronger story of its own. Your reputation does not need to be rebuilt through desperation. It can be restored through truth, consistency, integrity, and time. And when that restoration arrives, you will understand that you never needed to beg anyone to believe you. You only needed to remain who you were when nobody else understood. They wanted your name destroyed. Now their own actions are being questioned. There is a moment when the entire direction of a situation can change, and sometimes that moment arrives without warning. One day, everyone is talking about you, questioning your character, repeating accusations, and treating someone else's version of events as though it were established fact. Then something happens. A document surfaces. A timeline is examined. A conversation is remembered. A decision is questioned. A piece of information that was ignored suddenly becomes impossible to overlook, and the conversation changes completely. The people who once pointed toward you may suddenly find themselves answering questions about their own actions. The spotlight they tried so desperately to place on your life begins turning toward theirs. This is the ultimate reversal, not because you planned revenge, but because truth has a way of exposing what manipulation tries to conceal. They may have believed that destroying your reputation would make them look stronger. They may have thought that if they convinced enough people that you were corrupt, dishonest, or unworthy, nobody would ever examine their own behavior. They underestimated something very important. When accusations are investigated, the person making the accusation can become part of the investigation. Suddenly, their words matter differently. Their decisions matter differently. Their records matter differently. Their relationships, conversations, and motives may be examined from another perspective. And that can be uncomfortable for people who believe they control the narrative. Imagine how quickly confidence can disappear when someone asks a simple question they weren't prepared to answer. Imagine what happens when the story they've repeated for months doesn't match the evidence sitting in front of them. Imagine when people who once believed them begin comparing the facts for themselves. That is when the atmosphere changes. The same people who once demanded explanations from you may begin demanding explanations from them. The same people who accepted their accusations without hesitation may now be asking why important details were never mentioned. The same individuals who thought you had everything to hide may suddenly wonder what they were being protected from knowing, and you don't have to orchestrate any of this. In fact, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to become obsessed with it. Your greatest victory is not watching someone else's reputation collapse. Your greatest victory is keeping yours intact. Don't allow their behavior to pull you into hatred. Don't allow their accusations to convince you that you must become aggressive to be heard. Don't let their exposure become your identity. You have already learned what it means to stand alone when people misunderstand you. You've already discovered that silence can be stronger than arguments. You've already experienced what it feels like to be judged without being fully heard. Now you have the opportunity to move differently. Let truth be enough. Let evidence speak. Let responsible people investigate what needs to be investigated. Let the facts establish what happened. Your role is not to punish anyone. Your role is to remain grounded, honest, and focused on rebuilding what matters. Because when people finally realize they were wrong about you, you may discover something unexpected. You don't need the apology as much as you once thought you did. The moment you understand your own worth, their approval loses its power. You can forgive without forgetting the lesson. You can move forward without pretending the pain never happened. You can accept restoration without becoming addicted to revenge. And perhaps the greatest sign that you have truly overcome the situation is when their downfall no longer excites you. You simply recognize that consequences belong to choices. If someone created false accusations, manipulated information, or attempted to damage another person's reputation, they must eventually deal with the consequences of those choices. That isn't your burden to carry. You don't have to push the process forward. You don't have to celebrate every revelation. You don't have to remind everyone that you were right. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply continuing to live with integrity. People are watching more than you realize. They are noticing how you handled pressure. They are noticing that you didn't become cruel when you were treated unfairly. They are noticing that you didn't manufacture lies to fight lies. They are noticing that you continued building your life while others were busy discussing it. And that consistency becomes its own kind of evidence. Your character becomes visible over time. The truth becomes stronger through repetition of what is right, not repetition of what is false. So if you are standing in a season where your name has been questioned, don't lose yourself trying to control the narrative. Remember who you were before the accusations. Remember the values you carried before the rumors. Remember that one chapter of misunderstanding cannot define your entire life. The people who judged you may eventually realize that they were looking at you through someone else's lens. And when their own actions begin raising questions, the irony will become impossible to miss. They tried to destroy your credibility, but their own behavior became the reason people started questioning theirs. Let that realization teach you something powerful. You don't have to fight every battle. You don't have to answer every accusation. You don't have to chase every person who walks away. Sometimes you simply stand firm, remain truthful, and allow time to reveal what people tried to hide. And when the truth finally becomes undeniable, don't look back with bitterness. Look forward with gratitude. Because the goal was never merely to prove them wrong. The goal was to survive the storm without losing yourself. And now, as the truth begins separating reality from deception, you can finally step forward with your head held high, knowing that the reputation they tried to destroy was never theirs to define in the first place.